There, no types.
Okay, perfect. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Schwarzkopf USA channel. My name is Ashlee Norman, and I am here today to talk to you about a little technique that I've been doing for a very long time that I like to call hybrid color melting. So, this is a crazy concept because what we're going to be talking about is taking our Agora Zero Ammoniated Permanent Color and using it as a toner. Now, I know what you might say because toning with permanent can get us into some trouble for a couple of reasons. But let's walk it back and talk about why we would want to tone with permanent in the first place. All right. So, first things first, let's talk about our natural level system. So this is a level finder that I actually manufactured and created myself. If you don't have one, I sell these exact ones on my website. The reason I like this one, the way I designed it to have the natural levels from darkest to lightest on one side, and then we have our exposed contributing pigment on the other side, along with our percentages of gray here. We have the color wheel on the front, and then on the back, there's some notes back here. So it talks about if you're going lighter versus darker, what you would have to formulate. So for example, if you are going to go darker, it tells you what to fill with. If you're going to lighten the hair, it tells you what you will need to cancel with. That being said, let's talk about a scenario in which you might need a permanent color versus a semi-permanent gloss in the case of toning. So if we have someone with a natural base of level 6 or lighter, and we put in level 9 or 10 highlights. So now we're putting a natural level 6 next to a level 9. This is not very high contrast, and you can definitely get away with glossing this. So for example, we might want to use our vibrance. So we could put, let's say, our vibrance 9-1, which is going to be an ash violet, right? Or violet ash. So what that would do is that would cancel the yellow that we expose in levels 9 and 10. Easy peasy lemon squeezy, gloss all over. If you needed to, maybe you could shadow root. So if you had to, you could shadow root with a 7 or an 8. Maybe even, let's say, for example, 846, which is a beige chocolate. So you could apply this at the scalp and then melt that into your level 10 formula. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Now, let's say, for example, they are darker than level 6. So now let's go darker. So we're going darker in our natural level system. Let's say they're all the way down into like a level 4 or darker. And you highlight them, you do a high contrast highlight, you highlight them all the way to a 9-10. You could see how the jump from these darker natural levels into this lighter level is pretty extreme and could almost look like a piano teeth look, right? So I always call that the broke brunette. It's the opposite of the expensive brunette. So let's say, for example, instead of just neutralizing the yellow at our level 9 and 10, we actually want to shift the natural base at the same time as toning the highlighted hair. So that's what we call a base breaker. So shifting the natural base while also toning the highlight is by definition breaking the base. Okay, so what are we essentially talking about? We're talking about taking this level 4 and lightening it up a couple levels, maybe to a 5, 5.5 even, to make a less high contrast. So we're softening the contrast between the darkest natural and the lightest hair at the same time as toning and glossing. Now, if we take, for example, our permanent color and we do let's say, for example, equal parts with 20 volume. What are the potential negatives? Well, first of all, we know that when we are taking, let's say, a level 4 and we're putting a level 10 with 20 volume, automatically we're going to expose warmth. So we're going to start exposing red and then orange and then yellow. So the number one thing, or the number one negative of toning with a permanent color, is too much exposure of warmth. So that's one thing that could happen, that could go wrong, right? Or let's say, for example, we're not just going to tone with the level 10. Let's say we also need to do a shadow root. So let's say we are going to start with a darker formula at the scalp. Let's say we're just going to do like a 7, 0, and an 8, 4, 6. So let's say a 7 natural with a level 8 beige chocolate. And then we're going to melt that root formula into our mid-lengths in the end with the level 10. So if we're shadow rooting with permanent color, the other issue that we can run into is this being too opaque, which means that we're actually covering up the highlights completely. So when we talk about opaque versus translucent, what are we really talking about? So opaque means absorbs light. Translucent means light passes through. So when we think about toning highlights, do we want to absorb the light over our highlights, or do we want the light to pass through our highlights? Typically, we want to see a dimensional color. That's the whole point of creating highlights, highs and lows. So when we talk about toning, we really want a translucent coverage where the light passes through. So that's the other thing that could be an issue with toning with permanent color. Number one, too much exposure of warmth. Number two is going to be creating too much opaque coverage in a shadow root situation. So we're going to talk about how we could do a toner with a permanent color to avoid those two issues by doing something clever, like diluting it with our hero product, hair sealer. So hair sealer to me is a very underused product. This is originally designed to seal the hair, right? So it's this concept of something that has a pH close to the natural, which is going to be acidic, 4.5 to 5.5. It's going to close down the cuticle after an alkaline service. Now, if you were to intermix this with your permanent color, so let's say, for example, you take your Agora Zero Ammonia and you mix it equal parts. So that would be, let's say, for example, you did it in ounces. It would be 1 ounce of color to 1 ounce of hair sealer to 1 ounce of your developer. So 1 to 1 to 1, equal parts. Why would you do that? For two reasons. Number one, you're going to shear out the deposit. So that means you're going to get less opaque coverage, more of a translucent light passes through, sheer gloss with the permanent color. So you're not going to get opaque lines of demarcation. It's not going to grow out with a high maintenance root. Number two, it's also going to drop the alkalinity. So it's going to make it less aggressive, which means you're going to expose less warmth. So you're going to get a cooler result in your base break. Okay, so let's talk about another reason that maybe you would tone with permanent color besides just shifting the natural base. What about gray? Okay, so I would say 75% to 100% gray. You're probably going to want to stick to your 1 to 1 with 20 volume, 30 volume, depending on if you're using the Zero AM or your Agora Royale or your 10-minute color. Now, if you're looking for a more translucent coverage, I'm not talking about, let's say, for example, using a demi-gloss to gray blend. I'm talking about translucent gray coverage where you get a highlight in the salt and a low light in the pepper. So you're matching the highs and lows of the white and the gray, or the salt and the pepper, with the color. So you get a softer grow out. You don't get that shoe polish hard lines of demarcation, which creates a more high maintenance gray coverage. So if we're talking about, let's say, 25 to 50% gray, this woman's not ready for opaque permanent coverage. She's not ready to come in every 2 to 6 weeks to get her roots retouched. She just wants a translucent gray coverage that has a little bit more gray coverage than just a gray blending. Then your option again is to take your permanent color and mix it equal parts with your hair sealer and your developer. So 1 to 1 to 1. So what is that going to do? That's going to do four things, three things, four things. So you can, in one session, shadow root and gloss, but because you're using permanent color, even though it's diluted with the hair sealer, you're still able to get a translucent gray coverage and a soft, cool base break all in one step. So if I have a client who comes in and let's say they're level 5 and darker with some percentage of gray, and I don't want to have to do a gray root coverage before my highlights or even have to tint a base color in between foils. Let's say I do all of my foil work first, shampoo it off, then go back in with my gloss, but instead I'm using my permanent color diluted with the hair sealer to do four things: shadow root and gloss, just like a traditional gloss, those two. But then also at the same time, I'm going to shift up the base a couple levels to soften the contrast between the darkest natural and the lightest hair at the same time as translucently covering my gray. Okay, so while I kind of explained that, I'm also going to save this live and send you guys, if you comment in the comment section, link. I'm going to send you a link to an exact example. I did this live for the Berlin Hair Fest. So just this last April, Schwarzkopf Global had a huge hair show in Berlin, Germany, and I got to be on stage presenting the Embrace Gray collection. One of the model scenario was exactly what I'm talking about. She had a natural level 5 with about 25 to 50% gray, and all I did was exactly this formula that I'm showing you. She had previous highlights and about 4 inches of regrowth. I didn't do any lightening, no bleaching, no highlights, no foils, nothing. All I did was I retouched her roots with my darker formula level, which was this exact formula level 7, level 8, 1 to 1 to 1, 20 volume and hair sealer. And then I used the level 10, 1 to 1 to 1, 20 volume and hair sealer in the hairline at the scalp. And then I pulled it mid-lengths and ends blended through with this shadow root. And that touched up her gray. It base broke her, it glossed her, it shadow rooted her, all in one step, processed for 20 minutes. So if you want to see a video of that, please comment below after this video and we will definitely send that to your DM directly. I want to talk one more thing just to explain more in depth into what this concept is of dilution, okay? So quickly, I'm going to go over the pH scale to explain this. Let's say, for example, this water bottle represents 7, which is neutral. Now, we all know that water isn't necessarily neutral on the pH scale, but we're just going to use this as our marker, okay? So first off, we're going to put this right here. So 7 is neutral. So this is going to be representing 7 pH. Above 7, going this way, is going to be alkaline. Below 7 is going to represent our acid, okay? So we know that we need alkalinity to lift. So hair itself, let's represent this for hair. Hair itself is actually 4.5 to 5.5. So hair is acidic, so it's down here. We need something that's alkaline to lift and lighten hair. So that's going to be first our permanent color. Now, depending on what line you use, we obviously have 3 different lines within the Schwarzkopf. So these are all permanent colors. They're all alkaline. They use different alkalizers. So if we have our 10-minute color or our traditional Gora Royale, these are ammonia-based permanent color lines. So the alkalizer within these 2 ranges is ammonia. Okay. Then we have our MEA-free or ammonia-free. This one has MEA, sorry. So our Schwarzkopf ammonia-free line uses MEA. So what's the difference between our alkalizers? If we're talking about ammonia, ammonia is a gas. So when you mix the tube with our developer, you can even sometimes smell it, which is why sometimes people perceive it as more toxic. However, that's not necessarily the case. Some people are allergic and sensitive to ammonia, which is why sometimes an ammonia-free permanent color line could be a great alternative. This MEA line, because MEA is not a gas, it's a liquid, it actually stays active longer. So you could think of it like this. If you're using an ammonia-based permanent color line, ammonia works like a rocket ship. first it's going to do the takeoff or the lightening of the hair, and then it's going to do the landing. So it's actually progressive. Once you mix that with the developer, it starts to oxidize and escape out of the bowl because it is a gas, which means it's the freshest the minute you mix it. After it sits in the bowl, it's going to start to dissipate. So it's going to have the lifting power first and then the deposit. It's also another reason why, if you're doing a base breaker with an ammonia permanent color line, you can have more warmth. Why? Because usually you're only letting it sit for 5 to 10 minutes, which means you're getting more of the takeoff, more of the lift or exposure of warmth in the natural pigment, and it's not sitting on long enough to deposit down whatever tonal direction that you chose. So if you're talking about an MEA-based permanent color line, it's not a gas, it's a liquid. It's going to stay in the hair longer. You're going to get more of even lift and deposit at the same time, which also means if you're base breaking with it, you're going to maybe not see as much warmth as well. So that's the other thing to think about. Okay, regardless, you need an alkalizer to lift and lighten hair. Now, how much of the alkalizer that's in the tube is determined by our universal level system. So we already know that our level 10 has a lot more alkalizer than our level 6. So level 10 means it has higher alkalinity and more power to lift, whereas our lower levels are mostly tint with a little bit of alkalizer. Okay, so let's go ahead and put these on the pH scale. So we're going to put our level 6 slightly lower and our level 10 slightly higher. Now we need something more alkaline, something more aggressive to lighten through our permanent color, because permanent color cannot lift permanent color. Otherwise, it would be self-destructive, right? So this is where our lightener systems come in. Okay, so they use a different alkalizer. The alkalizer within lightener is actually something called persulfates. Now, we don't have a universal level system like we do with our tubes of color. So what we go off of when we're working with our Schwarzkopf is the number on the box. Okay, so for example, within our Blondie range of lightener, we automatically have our most gentle lightener, which is going to be our precision lightener. So you can see it says 7 on the box. So precision lightener is to a precise line, meaning that this was designed specifically for global blondes that you can apply directly to scalp, and it's not going to swell past the line demarcation, which means you'll get a completely accurate retouch. This is going to be our most gentle lightener because it can go on scalp. Okay, so then next we have our clay lightener within the Blondie range. Now the clay lightener has a 7+, and that's going to tell you that it's slightly stronger than even our precision lightener. The clay lightener is designed to be used for open air painting. However, I also like to use it inside of foil because it is a more gentle lightener type, especially around the hairline, for example. Now, we also have our 9+. So our 9+ Blondie is going to indicate that it is a lot more alkaline and more aggressive than our 7 levels of lift. So does that mean you're always going to get 9 levels of lift? Not necessarily. It just is telling you that this one is stronger. So think of this as our universal level system for the lightener range. So we know that this is going to be our most aggressive lightener type. It has the most amount of persulfates. I like this lightener for teasy lights, because usually when you're doing any type of teasing, there's more hair inside of a foil than a thin slice, for example, within a baby light, a traditional highlight, or even an air touch slice. I also like to use these for big ombre tip outs because it's all the way down at the bottom of the length. It's away from the heat of the scalp. It's behind a tease. And so I need, and because when you're doing a big tip out, it's a lot of hair inside of foil. So you almost need that lightener to be a little strong and swell a little bit to encompass that big packet of hair. So they all have their different uses, okay? Similarly to our, level 1 to level 10, okay? Now I'm going to put these on the pH scale. So these are going to be a little weaker, this one being the strongest. So next step is to talk about our developer. Where does developer sit on the pH scale? This is really important to understand when it comes to mixing ratio. So if I have, let's say, for example, 6 volume up to 30 volume. Now, we all know that the percentage or the volume is the percentage of hydrogen peroxide, but regardless of the percentage or the volume, we know that these actually sit acidic. So they're going to be all the way down here. Why is that important to know? Why is it important to know that our developer is acidic, even sometimes below the actual pH of hair, skin, and nails? Well, this has to do with mixing ratio. So if we take our highly alkaline lightener and we mix it 1:1, that's going to be a stronger mixing ratio. So thicker the quicker. Power is in the powder. If we take our strong alkaline lightener and mix it 1 part powder to 4 parts developer, what we're actually doing is we're dropping the alkalinity, we're lowering the pH. So what that means is we're actually making it more gentle or a weaker lift. So power is in the powder, thicker the quicker, wetter the weaker. Those are the 3 rules of mixing ratio. Now, can you take your lightener and mix it 1:4 on purpose to make it a weaker lift? Absolutely. So for example, if I'm lifting through some previously lightened mid-lengths and ends that I'm trying not to create damage, but I just need to shift a level or 2, I might take my precision lightener and mix it 1:4 6 volume or 1:4 13 volume, just to shift through mid-lengths and ends that have been previously lightened without damaging that. So that's really important to know. Now, the question that I'm bringing up with this is, do you think that you can manipulate mixing ratio in the same way with lightener that you can with permanent color? Absolutely. So let's say, for example, you wanted to make a weaker lift. So you could even take, let's say, what if you took your level 10 permanent color and did 1 part permanent to 2 parts 6 volume? This is another way to make a softer base break, meaning that because you did double developer, what it's going to do, it's going to drop the pH and make it less aggressive, less alkaline, which means it's going to give a softer lift, less exposure of warmth. So that's an option, is to take a lower volume of developer and double your developer. Okay, so that's one way to do it. The way that I'm proposing in this way is to add in your hair sealer. So where does this sit again? So let's put these back on the pH scale. Okay. Before I mention that, let me say where vibrance sits. Okay. When it comes to demi-permanent deposit-only color, not all demi-permanent lines are created equal. So what I mean by that is some demi-permanent lines are acidic and some demi-permanent lines are alkaline. So some demi-permanent lines are more of an acidic lip gloss that live on the outside layer of the cuticle. They have no power to lift, so they're going to simply deposit pigment only. But they also don't have the same longevity. Why? Because they're going to fade off within 6 to 8 shampoos, right? So when you're doing it more on the outside layer and just depositing a little bit of pigment with an acidic lip gloss, it doesn't have the same longevity. So the nice thing about the Vibrance line, it does actually have NEA. So it does have an alkalizer. Now, it's not going to have as much alkalizer as, let's say, for example, our ammonia-free line. So I would say if you're going to use the level 10 with your 13 volume or your 4%, you can actually get some gray blend and also shift the base a little bit. I would say you're not going to shift the base if the hair is coarser. So that means if it's larger in diameter or more intact layers of cuticle, the Vibrance line is not going to be strong enough to really shift. If the hair is finer, meaning it's smaller in diameter with less layers of intact cuticle or more porous hair, you can definitely get a base break even with your Vibrance and your 4% or 13 volume. This is also a great option to create a gray blend. So if you want to get a gray blend with Vibrance, you can also do this. I would say you're going to get slightly more coverage out of your Agora Zero AM, even when it's sheared out, for example, with the hair sealer. Okay, so just keep that in mind. This is definitely an option for that. Now, I would still say that this is going to be maybe 7 on the pH scale. I'm not sure exactly. It depends on also the level. So A level 10 vibrance is going to have more alkalizer than a level 3 vibrance. Yes? Okay, obvious. So it's still going to be alkaline to the hair, but it's not going to be as aggressive as your permanent color. So let's put it somewhere in between. Okay, so hair sealer. Again, your hair sealer, sorry friends, your hair sealer is going to be meant to seal the hair after an alkaline service. So of course we can assume this is acidic, closer to the natural pH of hair, skin, and nails. So I would put this right next to hair. So now you kind of have an understanding of where things sit on the pH scale, tells you how aggressive they are, how much lift, how much they're going to expose warmth, how much their ability to cover gray. So again, what am I proposing? I'm proposing taking a permanent color and mixing it equal parts with your developer and your hair sealer. 1 to 1 to 1. Now, the question that you might have is, how do you know what volume of developer to mix? Great question. So if you want to create a deposit only color, let's say, for example, you're going to do a shadow root and you don't want it to lift the scalp, I would do 1 to 1 to 1 with 6 volume. If you want a soft shift with a little bit of gray coverage, then I would recommend 13 volume. If you want to cover gray and base break a little bit more at the same time, you need to use 20 volume. So equal parts. So in the example that I'm going to send you in the DMs, the video that I refer to in my Berlin Hair Fest example, that one we did want to cover gray. So we used the 20 volume in the root formula and 20 volume to pull through the mid lengths and the ends. If she had no gray, then maybe I could have used 6 volume or 13 volume with the scalp and then melted that into my lighter formula with the 20 volume. Why would you want to pull through the ends of 20 volume, you might ask? Well, if you think about it, is it really 20 volume once you're diluting it with an acidic conditioner? Not really. It's probably more like 10 or 13. But at the same time, again, we're talking about shifting the natural base. So if anything, wouldn't you want the ends to be lighter? Is that going to damage the hair? No. Why? Because again, this hair sealer is protecting it. So the hair sealer is going to put that conditioning agent so that you can pull through permanent color with 20 volume to shift the natural base slightly, not expose too much warmth, also sheerly cover gray without damaging the hair. Is that cool or what? So I hope you enjoyed my little lecture. I am open for questions. If you want to follow me, it's Ashlee Norman Hair. So Ashlee spelled with 2 E's, no Y. Ashlee Norman Hair. Please feel free to DM me or even the Schwarzkopf channel. Thank you guys so much for having me. And if you have any questions and want to have different examples, I have plenty of videos that I can send you. We're going to go ahead and save the live now.